Hello and welcome to Neuroshambles, the podcast that aims to shine a light into some of the murkier corners of what it's like to parent neurodivergent kids. I'm Mark Allen, and every episode I'm going to be swapping stories with my guests about some of the frankly ludicrous nonsense we have to deal with on a daily basis. So, if you're anything like me and you're feeling frazzled, overwhelmed and pretty much an outcast from polite society, join me. Hello and welcome to episode 27 of Neuroshambles. As always, it's a joy to have you aboard, Neuroshamblers. Thanks for joining me. Thanks also for the lovely messages you're sending in. Keep them coming. It's a genuine treat to receive them. I had a really lovely one from Alice, who contacted me on Instagram, who said, "Hi Mark, just wanted to say I've really enjoyed listening to your podcast and that Jay reminds me so much of my son Jasper, pathway for ASD, definitely PDA, 7 years old. Thought I'd share a what the flip moment with you as I could so imagine it being one of Jay's. My life is so boring. If space had an edge to it, I would go there, sit in the corner and be as far away from everyone as possible." I love the idea that he would be less bored sitting in the infinite vacuum of space. Staggering stuff, and hopefully one that you didn't take too personally, Alice. Anyway, thanks for sharing that, Alice. I genuinely appreciate it. And if anyone's got any other what the flip moments to share, please do. I've got a really great show lined up, if I do say so myself, this one. No, this is not because of me, but because of my wonderful guest that I'll be introducing you to. So it's a bit different from my normal shows. I'm hoping that you appreciate it as much as I loved recording it. We'll also have some neurodiversity champions, some tiny epic wins, and of course, some of my own what the flip moments. So stay tuned for that. But for now, let's just crack on.
Meet the guest.
Okay, so this week's guest is someone I'm really excited to talk about because not only does she have a fascinating story, having raised a neurodivergent child as a solo parent in the early 1990s, but she's also been a wonderfully supportive neighbour of mine for nearly 10 years. She essentially bore witness to the journey Tam and I underwent when we were gradually realising that our kids were neurodivergent, so I'm genuinely delighted she's agreed to come and talk to me about her own experiences. I'm going to welcome Stephanie from over the road. How are you doing, Stephanie?
I'm good, thanks. How are you, Mark?
Good. Thank you so much for coming and talking to me on Neuroshambles.
Thank you for inviting me.
So obviously, as with any episode of Neuroshambles, we want to learn a little bit about your setup. So tell us who you were working with there, Stephanie.
So I have a son, Charlie, who is now in his early 30s. So he was born in the early 1990s. And life was pretty different then. Different in so many ways.
So what's his profile then?
So Charlie is diagnosed autistic with moderate learning difficulties, OCD and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And
a massive love of Disney.
And a massive love of Disney, which is almost certainly my fault. But hey, it had to be something.
That's undiagnosed love of Disney, but it's very evident every time I meet him.
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay, well, thanks for that introduction to your setup. We are going to get on with the topic of the week because it's one that I'm really interested in learning a bit more about.
What's the topic of the week?
Now, this week's topic is quite a departure for me because it's the first one that I've done that I've got no direct experience of, which is a bit weird. Because obviously, as someone whose first child only received their diagnosis in 2021, that was Jay's diagnosis, my experience of the SEND system is obviously very recent. So I was really interested to find out more about what the experience of raising an autistic child was a long time ago, before the internet, before social media, of course, but also when society as a whole had a very little understanding of autism, ADHD, and other hidden disabilities. So for me, this is going to be a really fascinating insight into the challenges that parents faced 3 decades ago, and hopefully a helpful perspective to help us understand just how far society has come in their understanding of neurodivergency in the intervening years. So, Stephanie, take me back. The early days in the 1990s. At what sort of age with Charlie did you first understand that something was a little different about him?
So he was probably about 15 months old.
Okay.
And up until then, had I, of course, had access to more modern knowledge, I would have seen other signs, but at the time, I didn't.
I guess you just had other people and their babies to compare to at that point.
Well, I did notice that rather than crawl, he used to do this kind of yogic flying. It's the only way I can describe it. So he would sort of sit with his legs in a sort of diamond shape,
Yeah,
and then he would kind of
just bounce across the room.
bounce
Nice.
along. That was his mode of mobility.
Okay.
And not apparently not crawling, not going through that crawling stage is a classic sign.
Straight to yogic flying is one of the
Straight to yogic flying.
one of the diagnostic criteria I've not learned about.
Well, there you go. You see, amazing what you can learn.
So obviously you're understanding, you're sort of looking, because that, we all do with all of our neurodivergent kids, is you presumably in baby groups or just with other mums at that point, and seeing how their kids are developing and thinking mine's developing on a slightly different route.
I think, yes, I didn't realise the significance of the yogic flying to start with. However, I did notice that at the time when speech should have started to develop, not only did it not, but other interactive skills kind of reduced.
Uh-huh.
And so you see these pictures of me. The only way I could keep him upright when I picked him up was I would do this kind of complete virtual backward flip because he was pulling away from me.
Right, okay. Yeah.
He wouldn't do any
He didn't want to lean
hugging
into
or
you like
no,
babies do.
no,
Okay.
no, no.
Mm-hmm.
He would want to be picked up in certain situations, but because he would want not to be on the ground.
Right, yes.
But he didn't. Yeah,
you were very much a means to an end, basically.
totally. And it was really you can imagine day to day how difficult it was. I mean, I'm 5 foot nothing. I don't weigh a great deal, as you know, and so he was quite a chubby baby and quite tall, and so anyway, that was a joy. But then he wasn't speaking, so I said to the health visitor, I said, look, I'm quite worried and I'd like to be referred. And she said, no, he's just a little bit slow. And I'm like, no.
That was his initial assessment. He's a little bit slow. This is a health visitor.
I said, no, this isn't a little bit slow. This is a lot worse. And she'd been visiting regularly. But people just didn't know, Mark. They didn't know.
Okay, because that was going to be my question. Is that in terms of access to information, because nowadays we got so much information, almost too much information. It can genuinely be quite overwhelming. I think as a parent of neurodivergent kids, and you're thinking, oh my god, I've got to learn about this, and it could be this, and you have to go into this research rabbit hole, and we're all exhausted just living life, let alone doing all the research enough to get a bloody PhD in this nonsense, But it is because there's so much out there, and that is fantastic. But also it is another thing where you constantly feel like you have to do homework to parent your own kids. But obviously you had the opposite end of that. What sort of information did you have access to back in those days?
Not a lot.
Because you wouldn't have known what it was at first, okay?
I didn't know what the problem was. No, I didn't. I knew there was something bad.
So what were the theories you got from other people? So the health visitor said he was a bit slow.
Well, I didn't even really worry about the theories. But I knew that I needed somebody to explain. I was desperate to have some sort of explanation about what the issue was, because I thought once I know what it is, I can deal with it or find ways of dealing with it. So a lot of my energy, I mean, bear in mind, I was back at work at this stage as well, running a house and students and lodgers and a husband who wasn't much use. And, so had my hands full anyway.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to get him diagnosed in some way. So a lot of my energy was leaping up and down, hassling the health visitor, the GP,
some things don't
trying
change
to contact. Yeah, no, quite. And actually, to be fair to her, she said, let's look how he is at 2 years old. And I just said I wasn't waiting that long.
Right.
And
okay.
she did agree to put him forward for some sort of assessment. at around 18 months, I'd been leaping up and down vociferously. I didn't leave her alone, poor woman.
That's what you have to do, though, right?
Well, that kind of characterises his and my journey through all
Mm-hmm.
this. Endless. But anyway, yeah. So how did I find anything out? Well, of course, we were desperate. So I raided the library.
Right. Was there much
I
literature available in the library?
Not much, really. I finally found, I mean, this is the very early days
Because
of
what are
the
you looking
internet.
at as well? If you go in the
Well, the
library,
internet, we had a computer. When did we first get that? Mid-90s, maybe?
it would have been mid-90s. So yeah, okay,
Mid or late
just about
90s.
coming in there.
You know, what a kind of big thing, you know, that sat on your desk and with another big thing that fired it. You know, you went
But
off and
good,
made a cup of tea while
but
it warmed up. Honestly, you think I'm joking?
But what we do now is we Google it, right? You type in, some symptoms or some things that you're worried about, and Google will come up with loads of different forums and different
No,
threads
no,
on social media
you had to
about
know what you were looking for.
exactly. So what do you type in when you don't know what it is that you're looking
Things
for?
like no speech and, you know, but I have to say, I think I was probably in shock, to be honest, because I blanked out a lot of it. But I felt we were just getting nowhere and people were making suggestions, but I wasn't really sure. So in the end, I paid to go privately to see a child psychologist or psychiatrist. I can't even remember. But it was good because we went there
Hmm.
and the thing that I picked up was that there was no language. So the language wasn't coming. So language development was where we started. So then, you know, there were all sorts of hearing assessments. But then with her, she was the one who said, I think we're looking at autism.
Right. So she was the first one to mention that, which
Yeah,
would have
she
been
was
when
the
he was
first one to
what sort of
mention that.
age?
Charlie must have been about 3 by then at least, I
Okay,
should
3.
think.
So you've still been battling for a year and a half to get someone
Oh,
to, yeah.
yeah,
When
endless.
she said autism, did that sort of make sense in terms of, or well, you just went and researched the bejesus out of it to say a little bit
Kind
more?
of. I mean, it still wasn't a dead cert. She wasn't going to literally said that's what she thought that we were looking at.
Right. Okay.
Because I'd gone to see her because she seemed to be some sort of specialist in child linguistic development, and obviously
Hmm.
that was all I had to go on, really.
So you've got autism as a thing to look at. What do you do then?
So then we found a magazine produced by another parent, but a parent who was already involved in research and he was a scientist of some
Hmm.
sort, maybe even a doctor, I can't remember. And he had a child who was what was then termed in those days, it wasn't called high functioning, or I don't know what these things are called anymore, but
Was that
it was
Asperger's?
Asperger's was
Yeah.
the term that was used. So I started going down what I now think were slight rabbit holes because the whole emphasis was how you can stop this developing and how you can help your child to become well again. And
Whoa. Okay. So that was that the
seriously,
actual current thinking, or was that just something that some snake oil salesmen were trying to peddle to get you to buy their therapy, for example?
I think it was probably born out of desperation and a lack of research and knowledge.
Yeah, so it hadn't already been completely dismissed as
And I did
quackery
say
at that
this
point.
was a parent who'd set all this up, and
Hmm.
so maybe that was his agenda, which, yeah,
He just wanted to change something and thought he had the answers.
absolutely.
Okay, so that's
There were all sorts of theories back then that it was maybe to do with gut absorption, gut lining, and
right. Okay.
I said it was a rabbit hole, didn't I?
No, but this
Um,
is really interesting because obviously so much of the learning that we've inherited has been from the shit you had to deal with, right? Of the dead ends that you had to go
so
down.
it
Or
was
the
all about what you did or didn't feed your child, and like you didn't have enough to worry about.
So did you end up changing Charlie's diet all the time? And
I did to some extent. I didn't really notice any great difference.
right,
But he was
didn't cure him
pretty
then.
picky from early on anyway.
Yeah,
So,
okay, I was gonna say I can't imagine changing changing my kids. Sorry, guys, it's
well, I was
asparagus.
doing this. I'm jumping back and forth a little bit because
That's
I
okay.
was doing this when he was quite young.
Hmm.
Um,
So you picked up the magazine, and did you actually go to this guy to?
no, he wasn't local. Heaven knows where
Oh,
he lived, miles away, hundreds of miles away
okay.
probably. So we just We just used it and then a bit later there was somebody set up some sort of online chat room.
Oh, okay. So the internet
My
is
ex
just
found
starting
it,
to.
and my memory of it was that it was just a load of desperate people, desperate for answers with their own horror stories, and
Yeah.
um,
But that in itself has some merit as well, though, because it makes you realise that you're not alone. And I guess at this stage, you don't know anyone else personally who's going through it, do you?
no, no, not at all. The first time I met anybody with the same sort of issues was when we were looking around schools.
Right. Okay. So that would be another 2 years.
Some
So essentially, you being completely isolated in terms of support, not really having a great deal of information, knowing that that your son needed some support and some accommodations, but that's pretty much it for like 4 or 5 years. Then.
with a child that I just couldn't relate to. I didn't
Hmm.
really know what to do. It was frantic and desperate. So a lot of it was just working it all out for myself,
Hmm.
and trying to work what worked. He'd get in such a state about everything. We had a house with a conservatory which had 7 windows, something like that. Had photos of what was happening in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, at lunch,
You did that off your own back.
just off my own bat. I went round and photographed all the places.
Because obviously this is in place now in terms of social stories and showing autistic kids
Oh, is it?
what.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Yeah, it is, Stephanie, that you were a pioneer.
I had no
um
idea. I
yeah,
just
this is a
knew
thing.
that
So social stories is really important for a lot of autistic kids who need to know what's happening now, what's happening next. So it's all pictorial, and you just did that because it was something that you found worked with Charlie.
yes, because if I showed him, look, I did a ton of talking. You think you talk a lot? I talk a lot. There's a video that exists somewhere of us visiting Disneyland in Paris,
Right. Is this
and
the first
Charlie
time?
must
This is
have
where
been
the seeds were
about
sown.
4 years old.
Okay.
I don't know. I think he was preschool. I'm not sure.
Hmm.
And we're walking round, and I am talking non-stop about this and that and the other, and kind of focusing him on
Hmm.
one thing after another. And it's weird to listen to. Well, I haven't for a long time. Kind of chokes me up a bit.
Why is it weird? In what way?
I think I just didn't realise at the time that I was kind of doing that. I don't think.
But that's communication, isn't it? And if he's not giving you communication, you're going to give him all the communication, you know?
It was a bit one-sided.
Yes, but it would have been going in. I mean, his deep love of Disney came from somewhere, Stephanie.
Yeah, I think it became a sort of it once he sort of. I mean, there was Postman Pat and Thomas the Tank
Hmm.
Engine. There were other characters, but they all became ways of communicating stuff to him because he would lift words in scenarios.
Like
What
whole,
he
so
was.
echolalia, so whole kind of phrases from things that he would
Oh,
watch.
the best one was he had croup. We got whipped into hospital, so there are some books there. I haven't brought anything with me because I didn't have time. And one of them was Do you know the Very Hungry Caterpillar?
Ah,
Is
of
that still a
course
thing?
I do. Eric
Ah,
Carle, it's an
right, okay.
absolute classic.
It starts with something like one moonlit night.
A
You
little
know,
egg lay
a
on
little
a
egg
leaf.
lay on a leaf. There you go. Well, anyway, the first page was missing, so I opened it. But Charlie knows the book, so he says in exactly the same cadence that I used
Yeah.
when I read One Moonlit Night, a little egg lay on a leaf.
Wow.
And my first thought was, my God, he can read. He's been reading it. And then I know it was the middle of the night and I was a
Yeah,
bit
fair.
stressed with the croup thing. And, and then I thought, my God, he's memorized it. And of course, he memorized everything I learned.
Yeah,
Once
wow,
he
okay.
actually started reproducing it, I realized he memorized everything.
Okay.
And he only had to hear something once.
Yeah, and it's in there. So this is, I mean, I'm so fascinated by the fact that you've created social stories on your own, and you presumably sort of had other ways of managing your day to day. So you're just finding strategies that work, not from anyone sharing them with you, and not from reading or researching, just winging it, basically.
Winging it, a lot of winging. There was a lot of winging done, definitely. And I learned what worked and what didn't. So when he would go off on one about, well, who knew what really half the time,
Hmm.
that I knew that if I swaddled him really tightly,
Hmm.
that worked for him, that helped him feel contained.
Which again is a classic regulation technique for a lot of neurodivergent kids. Now, like Jay absolutely loves it when he's feeling dysregulated. If I just give him a massive bear hug and like almost to the point that his ribs feel like they're about to break, and then he taps out. But he does ask me to do it, and I think India likes it as well. So you're just sort of discovering it as you go along, and this resonates with what it seems to be a theme of everything that I talk about in Neuroshambles, which is that our kids don't follow a regular rule book, so you have to write your own, and your trial and error really of working out what tends to,
Totally.
and that is communication in its own way. He's dysregulated, he's having a meltdown, and then you swaddle him and he responds to that. Then you learn another strategy to put in your rule book. And yeah, that's really interesting that you're doing that without anyone sort of sharing that with you, I guess.
I think, and there were a lot of things that now you would probably know are going to be issues, but noise was often an
Hmm.
issue, of course, overstimulation of all sorts, but noise particularly. But the trouble was, one day it would be one noise, and that would persist for about a week, and then the next week that seemed to have been forgotten, but it was something else. So
Okay.
one joy was he
So,
suddenly had a complete meltdown about seagulls.
oh no, and we live in Brighton, Stephanie.
And it was even
Uh,
worse. We used to live in a different part of Brighton that was nearer the sea, and well, you could
yeah.
not go out the front door. I was at my wits' end, absolutely tearing my hair out. Nobody had thought of head cancelling earphones or anything.
Right, right. Okay. So did
But
you have ear defenders or anything like that?
I'm not even sure if they existed. Honest to God, I'd never heard of them.
Okay. Hmm.
But what I did work out was but I could put my hands over his
So
ears,
you'd cover his
or
ears and sort of shepherd
yeah,
him
I
out the
would
door
cover
and
them, or
mhm.
I did know about, little soft ear things that you could put in your
Oh, like
ears
those
because
little
they were
earplugs
a
that you
thing
could
when
get.
you went
Hmm.
on flights and stuff.
Yeah.
So I used those, but they would fall out. Yeah.
Yeah. So piece by piece, bit by bit, you're sort of building up an understanding of how your boy operates in the world, which is, very different to how other people are doing it. Because obviously you're not interacting with many other people who've got neurodivergent kids. How were you treated by other parents?
Well, it was interesting because, as I said, I worked. So I lived quite near my sister, and I lived next door to somebody. She and I were both pregnant at the same time.
Hmm.
We developed an arrangement because we all worked. So if you weren't working, you were looking after your child or children and the other two people's child or children. So
Right.
I never
Okay.
had
Hmm.
fewer than four children generally, one of which was mine.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
they, of course, all grew up around it, so didn't really bat an eyelid.
So you had sort of other children when you were looking after Charlie, but conversely, did Charlie go to other people?
Yes,
And
he
how were they
did.
with that? I mean, how, because obviously you know what the rule book is, and how were they with him?
Um, I don't think it was probably that great for him at all, but I didn't understand. Probably, except by the time it was too late, that was probably hadn't been a really very good experience for him. Though whether it would have been any better just with me, I've got no idea. I mean, I suppose the thing was for him is that he was so wrapped up in his own world. He
Hmm.
really was. I mean, he barely noticed anything or anybody else. So I think probably what they did was just park him somewhere a lot of the time, but that was fine by him.
Yeah, yeah,
Very happy to be parked.
yeah. Fair enough.
There's a picture of him sitting in a field with an old football and a spoon,
Hmm.
tapping it, perfectly happy, hours. So being parked in a corner doing something was fine.
Yeah, okay.
Did that help him? No, I'm sure it didn't. Did it do him any great harm? Who knows?
But it helped you,
Hopefully not.
because you obviously then still got to work, which you needed to do at the time as well. So you were saying that you just sort of had the kind of close friends on the street, if you like, but outside of that, how were people with you and
Oh,
Charlie?
I mean, generally the attitude was that clearly had very poor parenting skills because I really didn't discipline my child. So I have particular memories of. I remember this is just one tiny example, but it's quite indicative, I think. So I had to go to Boots. Don't ask me why. I had to get something,
Hmm.
and I thought that's okay. We'll go to Boots because we can go and have a look at the Disney children's plates and things. He'll
Hmm.
like that. Now, shall I do the thing I've got to do first and say we're on our way to the plates, or should we do the plates first? But then how am I going to get him to the other bit of Boots? And maybe I can take one of the plates with me. Anyway, whichever way I decided it, I got it wrong.
Oh,
And he just threw himself on the floor and let rip.
so absolute meltdown in Boots.
So there were loads of people tutting, but that went straight over my head in those days. But this one man came up to me and said, "Really, you should get a grip, you know." So I said, "Actually, he's autistic," which shut him up, not because he
Yeah.
understood what I meant. He thought it might be a communicable disease. That was my
He
life,
backed
really.
off.
When I had him, I mean, I think what we all knew was that you could park him. So you're going to a park or something, that was fine. You could park him. You needed to keep a close eye on him so
Mhm.
that other children didn't kick him or do something to him. But as long as they didn't interact with him, it was good. Um,
But generally, people, when you're out and about, don't understand what autism is. They don't understand his behavior. And, as I said on a recent episode with Lisa Lloyd, the judgment from other people that you're a shitty parent is a timeless assumption made of neurodivergent kids. But it sounds like, as you were saying, you didn't discipline him in the sense because you knew that this is not a disciplinable offense. He's not able to control this. He's not acting out of defiance or malice or manipulation. He's just overwhelmed. And you understood that again instinctively. That's not anything that you read in a book, as I understand it.
no. And also bear in mind, by this stage, it's if he's really off on one, I am not going to be able to scoop him up. He's too big already for me to
Right.
be
So
able
what
to
sort of
do
age
that
is
with. By
this?
about the age of 4 or 5,
Right.
I
Okay.
can't. So I'm going to have to get down there with him
Hmm.
and then try and get it to a position where we can manhandle each other into a buggy or whatever.
And did anyone sort of kind of at least empathize, if not understand?
No, never. But you have to know that I would avoid going anywhere.
It was no wonder. It seems like everyone was just an arsehole
Shopping was done late at night, or
in the shadows.
I just didn't.
Yes, which I presume was another technique to prevent him from being dysregulated as well, because there'd be fewer people
Absolutely. Well, the
about.
whole thing was
Mm.
just so crisis ridden. I mean, like, why would you?
Yes, yeah. So you find what
Happily
works.
starve, quite frankly.
I was kind of interested in what societal understanding of autism might have been at the time, and I know that Rain Man came out in 1988, so I'm presuming that some people thought that was what autism was.
I think you possibly overrate. A Rain Man was about an adult,
Yes, true. Yeah.
and secondly, I don't know that it really gave people too much of an insight into autism.
No, it didn't. I'm just
I'm not
thinking
sure
that
that
they had no other frame of reference, though, right?
they kind of should have, but
It was so
I
off the
think,
radar, I guess, that it wasn't anything that they
I mean, for
linked to it.
those of us with neurodivergent people in our lives, it was like, yeah. But it was also terrifying
Yes.
because it's like, oh my God, is this what I'm looking at?
Is this what it's going to
So,
become?
yeah,
So there's
terrifying.
no one, outside of a very select kind of few people know about Charlie's condition, but presumably at this point he's diagnosed. So tell me about school, because that's quite interesting.
So we started having a look round, and in the end, I fought tooth and nail. And you can imagine it was tooth and nail because it's a lot of money to have him in a special school.
Yes.
There was a
Okay.
school which no longer exists now, which was for children with moderate learning difficulties,
Hmm.
but not physical disabilities. And they had autistic units in the school, classes of about 12 children maximum.
Right. Okay.
And you can imagine those places were like gold dust. So I
Because this
thought,
is the thing as well. Sorry, just to jump in. I mean,
mm,
there's not more autistic children around now than there was then. It's just that they're now connected and they're being diagnosed and they're being seen. But sort of, whereas you were not connected, so you presumably you didn't know that there were any other children out there like Charlie.
no,
So when
I
you go
mean,
into that school, it must
no,
be like, oh, there's a community of us.
unbelievable. Yes, it was like, oh, fantastic. But I'm white, I'm middle class, and I'm reasonably articulate. Well, I was more so then, I assure you, less demented. So I really fought
Yeah.
hard,
Hmm.
and the autistic unit was peopled fairly much by children whose parents were white, middle class.
Right. Yeah.
The rest of the school wasn't. The rest of the school was for children with learning difficulties,
Hmm.
and they were in different classes, and it was very interesting. It was such a social distinction. I didn't pick that up initially, of course, but you know, and I think what I'm saying is, I think that just reflects that, not that all children who are autistic are middle class, it reflects that the parents fought tooth and nail because they felt that that was the best resource for their child. And maybe others either had no idea they had children with these problems or what the problems were, or, well, I don't know. I couldn't say. But they were already pushing for children to go into mainstream school. And I thought, over my dead body, he
So
will
they
be
were.
annihilated.
So you're already aware of this point, and they're trying to sort of push Charlie towards mainstream because obviously places are pretty limited in the special school. So obviously you were fighting to get him in, and how did that work? Was he given a place in the mainstream in the hope that you'd just
Oh,
suck it up?
yes. A week before the
Hmm.
end of the summer term, when he was due to go in the autumn term
Yeah.
following, they agreed that he could have a place in the school that
Oh,
I'd chosen.
amazing. Oh, that's yeah, yeah. Because you must have been obviously terrified about the prospect of him in mainstream. I know how I feel about the prospect of Jay in a mainstream secondary school, and just knowing what that would do to him has filled Tam
Mm,
and I with enormous anxiety, and
I'm not
you know,
surprised.
and a lot of having to kind of fight for him to be in the right place. So. You know, again, nothing changes, does it, in that sense that you fight and you do what you can, and
Resources are few and far between. I mean, I hope that there are choices for you and that you're better able to access what he needs.
No. No,
No,
I don't think so.
no.
Because again, no, like I think there's probably more available now than there was when you were, were
Well,
looking
I
at
don't
it
know
for
so much
Charlie.
actually. I don't know about that because now it's like everybody's going to be in mainstream, which would be fine if they allocated the resources, but they don't. And they didn't back then.
Hmm.
They totally didn't back then because they didn't really know what they were doing.
No, so it's just like, well, just keep him out of mainstream, put him in this school, and how
It's
did he?
money.
Yeah, and how did he cope at the school?
Oh, no, that was good.
Okay.
That was really good. I felt totally vindicated
Ah, great.
because he did settle there and the staff were fantastic. It was, so as I said, about, I think about 12, 10 or 12 in the class.
Hmm.
There was a teacher and two care assistants. Can you imagine? Wow.
And that must
I
have felt
know.
amazing to you, though, that
Oh,
that
it was
that
just like
he's in the right place,
fantastic.
and also he's around other people Socially, was he sort of starting to evolve as well because he's around people who are similar?
Yeah, I mean, there were certain things they said, like in order to get him in, I had to have him out of nappies in the day
Right.
by the
Okay.
skin of our teeth.
Oh, really?
Managed that, yeah.
That was a long, messy summer by the sounds of it, Stephanie.
That was a difficult summer where I had to try and work out. I thought there has to be a formula for this. If I can work out the formula, I'll crack it. There's always a formula
What
with
did you
Charlie.
do? How? Yeah. Okay.
So I started with working out. Do you really want this, Steve?
I do, because I can't imagine it's going to be social stories, is it? Like pictures of shit on the walls.
I had to start by working out, is there a pattern to the poo? Is there a poo pattern?
Right.
If I can
Okay.
work out the poo pattern, I can do toileting at poo times.
Okay.
And that was, anyway, I won't go into more grim
But
detail.
again, you're going blind. At this point, you're not in school, so you're not swapping stories with other people. You're not finding it online or via social media. You're just literally like Columbo trying to work it all out yourself
Totally, yeah.
based on the information you're given. So,
But by this time, I've got, 4.5 years worth of working it out for myself. So you get quite canny.
so once you met the other parents at the school, did you start to feel like you were a little bit more part of a neurodivergent community? Because that's one of the things that for Tam and I in particular, and I know just talking to so many other parents of neurodivergent kids, connecting with other parents who are going through the same thing was a lifesaver. Just knowing that you're not alone and knowing that that there are people that aren't going to judge you, they're not going to be mean to you about your kids, they're just going to understand you because they're in the same place. That's been so important to us, and I can't imagine that was any
I
different for
can't
you.
imagine, to be frank, because what you need to know was children were taxied to this school from all over
Right. Okay.
because there was only one. And actually, it wasn't Brighton and Hove in those days, it was East Sussex.
So you didn't meet the other parents then?
Well, if you wanted to meet the other parents, you had to make that happen. So I made it happen.
Of course. That's one thing I'm learning, Stephanie. You just get shit done.
By volunteering the first year that he went there to be chair of the PTA.
Wow. So you
They needed a
became
chair, I just did it.
okay.
And another woman whose son, we kind of sort of clicked. We met when we were looking round.
Mhm.
And actually, they're still friends, the boys.
Okay.
Which
Oh,
is
that's
lovely.
lovely.
But she and I kind of clicked, and she became the treasurer.
Right. So
And I was the
between you.
chair,
Mhm.
and she was the treasurer for the next 11 years.
Wow. Just running the operation by the end of it.
Because there was no playground, there was none of
Was
that.
that genuinely a conscious decision? That's like, if I take a role here, I'm going to meet other like-minded people that I'm not going to have
Totally.
access to.
Totally.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas now, oh, so much easier. You just go,
I
because there are local
yeah.
support groups. Was there any sort of, that was going to be my next question, really. Were there any sort of support groups available? Because obviously we've got things like Mascot and Amaze in Brighton, and there's, I all around the country are sort of local support groups that are organised online predominantly, but I'm presuming that local community centres and sports centres will have some sort of meetups. Did you have anything like that?
Nothing.
Nothing at all.
I mean, I don't think I had any energy left over,
Yeah, I can
to
imagine.
be frank, to set anything up, and I wasn't aware of anything existing.
But that's the thing that you're sort of starting to learn, is that if you needed anything doing, you had to do it yourself, right? There wasn't a network or a community of people that had sort of banded together and pooled their resources.
There were a few of us whose kids went to that class, 3 or 4 of us, and that was it. Honestly, I don't think any of us had the energy for it, really, and that was just good enough, really.
Yeah, but you're starting then, I guess, to sort of compare notes and swap ideas of
yeah, absolutely.
bits of research that you're picking up from other places, I
and
presume.
I started, so the little boy whose mother, she and I made the connection, so I would have him over for play dates, and she would have mine over, and there was another mother, and she was a single parent already by this stage, wasn't
Hmm.
she? Can't quite remember. But anyway, she had an older daughter, and then she had this lad. Anyway, I used to have him over too because they were all kind of friends.
Hmm.
But she didn't really reciprocate. I thought, well, everybody's different, it's fine. But then she wound up having a mental breakdown. I wound up moving her daughter in with me, and
You
yeah.
took on another child as well as the PTA.
Well, yeah, it was a bit, yeah. The trouble was because there was so little available for people, it was just about all you could do to hold your own shit together.
I can imagine.
Never
Yeah.
mind
Yeah,
sort of
absolutely.
what I'm trying to say is support groups. Oh, because there were none of the networks available because everything was lacking, really. I was just so
Yes.
grateful to have the school doing an adequate job with him. That was enough for me. I
Hmm.
mean, the school holidays were another nightmare scenario, but let's not go there.
When we chatted about this initially, you said you kind of listened to a couple of episodes of Neuroshambles, and it was quite interesting to you how different things are now. Certainly, parenting approaches and the knowledge about different types of autistic presentation, and explain a little bit more about what you found different about it.
Look, I think life is different now. Parenting is different for everybody.
Hmm.
So it's not just for neurodivergent kids. But I think sort of hearing about the amount of, it's not just what's available out there for you all, which I couldn't be more delighted for because that awful isolation was just
Hmm.
the pits. I mean, I developed quite a hard carapace
Right.
to
Okay.
cope with, responses. And I'm sure to some extent that's the same now. But it would have been nice in Boots to have said he's autistic and for somebody to go, oh, okay, kind of,
Yes.
I don't
Yes.
really understand, but I kind of get it. Because now I know that for Charlie now, that if
Hmm.
he tells people he's autistic, it means something,
Right. Okay. He didn't have that for a long
which
time, I'm
is,
guessing.
no, well, he was busy desperately trying to not be because it wasn't a thing to be.
Hmm.
And nobody knew what it meant. And also like the sort of journeys that you go on with your children and how you negotiate stuff with them. I mean, I suppose I sort of feel like, gosh, I wish I'd known all that then. God, I must have made some dreadful decisions, and I know I did.
I'll just be clear though, Stephanie. I've also made some dreadful decisions, and I've got less excuse because I've got more research to draw on. We're all just
Well,
winging it, aren't we? Basically, and I don't think that's changed. Other than we've just got a lot more things that we should be reading or should be learning about to educate ourselves more, I guess.
maybe that's good. Yeah, as you say, it's probably a bit overwhelming. I know that having some information just makes one at least feel one has some sort of input or control. Control's probably the wrong word, but
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah,
knowledge is
having
power or something.
well, as you were saying, when the first person said that Charlie was autistic, he was like, "I've got something to go on. I've got a
Yeah,
lead,
exactly.
and I can
Right,
go
let me
and
find out about this.
exactly."
At least I can. And in some ways, I think it did help. The biggest breakthrough for me, but I've realised that this was already when Charlie was 10, was stumbling across Simon Baron Cohen, who I
Right.
first
Okay.
read something about in a newspaper or
Hmm.
something. And he published something called The Essential Difference. I don't know if you've come across it, probably
No,
feels
but I've
old
heard
hat.
about it.
Oh my goodness. That was just massive. I
Right.
was like, okay, now I get it. I really kind of get it, or as get it as I'm ever going to.
Right. Okay.
Um,
So that was your sort of light bulb moment of reading something
Total
and like,
light
oh,
bulb
my
moment.
child is being described, and I've not seen anything that's explained my own child to me in this sort of
Ah,
way.
it
Okay.
was, I can't tell you, the years fell away. And very interestingly, at the end of that book, or the original book, I don't even know if it's still there, there's this kind of quiz thing you can do.
Hmm.
So my husband and I did it in all naivety. And the concept that's, if you're not familiar with it, that Simon Baron Cohen puts forward is that the way human brains operate is all on a kind of spectrum. And you can be anywhere on that. There are more women more on this end and more men on that end, but there's loads of crossover and all this sort of thing. But ultimately, the sort of the further into the male brain spectrum you go, you kind of get a lot more of the sort of traits.
Okay.
But it was massively helpful at the time because it gave some sort of sense of journey, and it looked at how possibly the sorts of jobs and things that appealed to people who thought in certain ways because it worked for them,
Mm-hmm.
like engineering. And I'm like, ding, 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 ding. And I
Right.
realised
Yeah.
my father was totally what we would have termed Asperger's.
Okay.
Totally,
Yeah. Yeah.
totally OCD. Did we know then? Of course we didn't. It was just silly. Anyway, we both took this test at the end. Surprise, surprise. My ex-husband was off,
Off the scale.
off the scale, autistic, and I
Aced it.
was so far down the other end that
Okay.
no wonder we had troubles. But it was light bulb. I mean, it just gave. I don't know how it would read these days. It would be interesting because I think my son sort of fitted what was beginning to be understood as a sort of autism with some sort of learning difficulty. But I don't think this is how children are categorized these days, and that's probably for the best. But I was so desperate for some more handles as he was about to become a teenager, and I knew I was going
Mm-hmm.
to be drowning again.
Sure. It's interesting now because there are loads of books now that people read and share, and the current thinking is of a certain type, but that's probably going to be disproved in 30 years' time, or just sort of not really current thinking in 30 years' time. But it appears that you adopted a similar approach again, almost just by intuition, with parenting Charlie, which is now sort of the paradigm in parenting neurodivergent children, which is
Really.
which is the gentle parenting approach. It's you weren't disciplining him, and you didn't have expectations of him that he wasn't able to fulfill. Whereas I'm sure that some of the thinking at the time would have been that you smack it into him. Do you know what I mean?
No, shall
Like
I give you a horror story?
yeah,
Okay,
please
so
do.
what I was advised to do because he wasn't talking was don't give him things until he says the word.
Right.
Now,
Okay. Yeah.
even I have the nous, thankfully, to sort of say, well, if I don't give it to him, he just won't have it. You seriously think he's going to give me the word? But they said, oh, well, he'll be hungry enough. I said, no, trust me, he just won't eat. I know he
Yeah.
won't.
Yeah. So you know him
What sort
already.
of idiot are you? Like this is never going to work.
Yeah, so it's what's interesting is that it feels like you were adopting an approach to parenting that again is sort of the paradigm for parenting neurodivergent children at the moment, but you didn't know that at the time. So because the gentle parenting approach only really started to take a hold. I very briefly looked into it, is in the early 2000s. So you were a precursor for all that. Looking back though, you must have seen a huge change. It's quite interesting because you've gone from this situation where there wasn't any real understanding of autism, and there wasn't any real awareness of how to accommodate autistic people, to now. And that must have been a huge change. Have you sort of been keeping an eye on it, just wondering how it's all progressed?
I think I can say is that heaven knows what people did who came before me. Well, I suppose the children just stayed at home. Yeah, if there wasn't the understanding out there, I don't think Charlie could be living out there
Yes.
in relative with more independence. I mean, it would have been
Well, this
unthinkable.
is the thing now, isn't it? That we're going to get onto is that Charlie is living a pretty full life. It always seems busy.
Well,
I bump into him in the
it's
supermarket
certainly.
now, and we have a chat usually about Disney. And he stops and says hello in the street, and he's really happy, and he's out in the world doing his own thing in his own
I
way.
mean, he is. There are definitely positives, and I don't want to take away from that. And he's achieved an enormous amount. I think the good thing about him going to a sort of what was called a special school then, was that there were no expectations. And in a way, I think for him, that worked really well. So he could build up his own expectations of what he wanted. So he decided that he wanted to learn to drive. I wasn't entirely sure I was ready for this
I
at
remember
all.
having a conversation with you when he was talking about learning to drive, and you were like, I'm hoping that he'll just sort of forget about that." And then the next thing I see him sort of going up the street in his
Totally.
in his
Oh my
car.
God. It was like he nagged me. And because I think, you always feel quite responsible for your children. But what happened in my day, if you had a child with a disability, then it was your fault. It went on being your fault forever. And if anything happened, that was obviously your fault for having allowed that to
Right,
happen,
yeah.
if that makes sense. Not that that doesn't happen to people with children who are neurotypical, but it's different and it changes over time. It didn't change over time.
Yes, because I guess your job as a parent of a neurotypical is to sort of equip them to be independent in the world and then push them
Precisely.
out there.
And then they're allowed to go off and make mistakes, but that wasn't the case
Yes.
if it was a neurodivergent child,
Okay. So
adult.
in with that in mind, and you're seeing him drive off down the street for the first driving lesson.
No. I did the first bit.
You of course. If there's one thing I've learned about this, Stephanie, you do it yourself.
Well, we'd already done learning to drive a bike. He insisted on riding the bicycle to college, which was in Lewes.
Right, wowzers.
There is a bike lane
No,
on the
I've
way
done that though
there.
before, and that's like I've done it a few
So
times. It's
I
quite long though,
drove
alongside him.
and I drove back because we tried trains, we tried buses, we tried that. There were problems. I mean, I've skated over a lot. There was so much bullying in a way, school was wonderful. He got taxied there and back, there was no. And then after that, so college was, all those teenage years, were really tough again, with having to try and negotiate around all the neurotypicals.
Right, okay, because he was then from the special school, he then went back into mainstream college, and
That was all there was. They had to leave at 16, yeah.
so that's quite. I'm quite interested in then when he left the mainstream and went into college, because again, you're now dealing with a much older, much more aware child who's still a child, but
Not aware, unfortunately. That so socially not good. Really not good
right. But what
socially.
but I guess the on the flip side of that, the neurotypicals that he's in with don't have any awareness of neurodivergency at this stage. They don't understand it. They don't have accommodations in
No, none
place,
at
and
all.
they
None at
so
all.
I presume this is where the kind of the bullying and the meanness came in.
Oh, I mean, it was really difficult. I mean, he has learning
Hmm.
difficulties, so he went on to what they called an entry form, which was like for children who'd come out of special
Hmm.
schools or struggled through normal schools, but had achieved nothing, no GCSEs, nothing. So they all had learning difficulties of some sort, but the majority were neurotypical. And so, no, there wasn't really, and the staff had very, very little
No
understanding
understanding,
of
no
any.
training.
Not really, it was still all in its infancy. So they didn't really know how to deal with the difficulties that arose. So we had 1 year which was okay, and then the journey to get to and from this college we tried trains, and he was bullied on the train, and somebody tried to shove him out of a window.
What?
I mean, there were quite big things.
Yeah, that's
And
horrendous.
then we tried buses, and that was, we tried it. No, we tried the bus first. That was the problem. And then we tried the train, him going with somebody else who was a near neighbour, but they couldn't really deal with it either, with the bullying. And so that didn't work. So then he wanted to ride a bike, which I could understand by then. So then we did some of the driving, and that was better. He was more in control then. And then he fell in love with this girl. So, in the end, I just, you know what, I can't deal with this. He can't deal with this. This is just not working. So took him out, tried him in another college, which didn't work for different reasons, but all to do with his inability to interpret social
Yeah, of
situations.
course.
And of course, being a teenager is all about social
Yes. Yeah,
situations.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so that was fairly catastrophic. And then I took time off work in the end, and I took about 3 months off and then got him set up, hence the supported employment office. They were the people who helped me.
But now, fast forward to 31-year-old Charlie. So 31-year-old Charlie is now
He is,
driving
and he wanted to, yeah.
in employment.
He is, he decided he really wanted to try that. So the thing is, when your child turns 18, I think it was, then you wind up having to claim different benefits. Do they still have disability living allowance, or is it all PIP now?
No, no, they do. Yeah.
Okay, so, well,
Mhm.
when they become adult, it's not DLA anymore. Fortunately for Charlie, it was. That continued because he was on a permanent assessment. It
Mhm.
was years before we had to do the PIP assessment,
Right.
which was truly grim. So I'd done all the fighting the good fight with the benefits thing, and it was all fairly stable. When he said he really, really wanted to try paid employment. The move into paid employment was massive, really, because it was then you couldn't be on employment support allowance anymore.
Right.
And he
Okay.
had to switch to universal credit, and it was a somewhat chaotic process. So we've always, in the background of all of this, always got this financial kind of tightrope you're walking.
Yes. Hmm.
And I'm not poverty stricken, thank God. Heaven knows what you do if you yourself are on benefits as well. God
Yeah.
help you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But what I'm trying to, I'm sounding despondent, I'm not. The point I'm making is it can all be done. You just got to
Yes.
gird your loins again and off you go
And
for the
yes,
next.
strap in and
Strap in and get going again. And
yeah.
so we've done all these changes through, and I hope that in the support groups that you have, that there'll be people who will say to you, no, look, come on, you can do it, it's all right. I mean, I helped endless people fill in DLA forms and PIP forms and,
Yeah. There's a
ESA
huge. I mean,
forms and,
this is the thing about the community is the neurodivergent community is hugely kind of supportive, and there's a lot of people who are willing to help. Like, well, I think everyone is. I will happily talk to anyone who's,
me
like there's a
too.
few people I know who are starting to understand that their children are neurodivergent. It's like, welcome aboard, come in, and you talk
Mm,
to them about it, and because we know what it's like, right? So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
hugely supportive, and that's a really positive thing. What we benefit from now that you didn't have the benefit of was the internet, and the fact that we can meet these people. And I mean, I in Neuroshambles, I've now done 20, this is the 27th episode. I've spoken to people
wow.
who are all over the country, and I wouldn't have had any access to these amazing people with their incredible stories and their huge amount of
Mm.
expertise. And just because of the times that we live in, it's been really important to me personally, and hopefully to some of the people listening to it. And similarly with the sort of the Facebook groups and the and the social media and stuff, it's people are able to find their tribes a lot more easily, and that's really a wonderful thing.
And I'd like to say as well, I think that the other crucial thing about the internet is Charlie can't manage money or anything like that. But with the
Right.
internet, I can do it all online for him. I can do
Amazing.
everything.
Yeah.
And so he can live a life. If we didn't have all that, there's no way that he could be living separately from me
Of course,
because
yeah. So you're like,
I'm managing two households, but
yes,
I
but
can
you're
do it
sort of
all online, or most of it.
you're pulling the strings, and he doesn't realize it, right? He's not there.
No,
He doesn't feel like you're overbearing and sort of too present. So
exactly.
he does live, relatively independently, right? He's living in his own accommodation.
Yeah, you can work out these days. Okay, he needs to be able to use a credit card. That's all he needs to remember a PIN. That's not too bad.
Hmm.
He never needs to manage anything else. You can fine it right down to what are the actual crucial skills that they
Hmm.
need, and everything else you can manage behind the scenes, or somebody else can manage behind the scenes,
Yeah,
which is the wonder of the internet, amongst many other things, definitely.
yeah. It's been amazing.
I think the message really is that given the opportunity, there was somebody on one of your other podcasts who was talking about how all their slightly extraordinary down a rabbit hole type interests can really bear fruit.
Yeah,
And
I
I
think that's
think,
Lisa Galley was talking
yeah,
about it.
it
Yeah.
was, yeah. So I think, yes, I would second that, just watch and learn, and also use their interests to help arm them against the world. So Charlie and I have all these little sayings that all come from various different Disney or other those sort of type films, but they're for use in certain situations to help him know how
Oh,
he
that's
can
amazing.
manage them.
Yeah,
Um,
lovely, because there's so many, like Disney's full of that kind of thing, right? Of
Absolutely.
yeah, ways to live your life.
But I have a smile and wave, boys. Smile and wave. Just let it go. Just let it go. Don't interfere. Don't. Yeah. So that's just one, but we have hundreds of them. Yeah.
Oh, it's lovely. So obviously, there's a lot of differences nowadays than there was when you were sort of growing up.
I hope so.
There are also a lot of similarities, I think, and that was kind of a thing that I wanted to touch on a little bit. So Sam Wilson, I've spoken to a couple of times about things that I'm sure are timeless in the world of parenting neurodivergence, which is being a social outcast, sort of
Yes.
just feeling socially isolated, which you've already touched on a little bit, and not really having not having access to a large amount of people who you can be friends with, and also not having the capacity for it, to be honest. You're exhausted
Mm.
most of the time. And the other one that I think is probably a timeless, and again is a Sam Wilson episode, which is Keeping Up with the Joneses, where you're initially just sort of looking at what the neurotypicals are doing, and initially you start comparing, and sometimes envy and resentment creep in a little bit, and then you just go, well, there's an acceptance. There becomes that acceptance of, well, this is who we are, and you kind of move forwards.
Well, let me just say something cheerful on that. Because,
Great.
as of course they all grew up, and they all started applying for university and all that sort of thing. And then, they all go out and meet with their friends and get on. Of course, mine didn't do that. Neither did he take any interest in tea, coffee, alcohol, drugs,
Hmm.
uh, or sexual intercourse, in an interest, but not a. And so I didn't have to deal with, scraping up drunken children or possibility of car crashes or the drug scene. Or now, I'm not saying that won't happen to neurodivergent kids, because they'll
Hmm.
probably have in other ways have opportunities that maybe Charlie didn't have. But I'm saying that sometimes they won't necessarily get hauled into that kind of herd behavior that is
Hmm.
so typical of teenagers and young adults, that can also be quite destructive for quite a few of them, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there are trade-offs sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any other similarities, that now that are sort of prevalent when you were dealing with this with Charlie?
I think one of the things that's crucial and very easy to overlook in the chaos of daily life is to, as an adult and a parent, to look after yourself.
Yeah.
Um, so I used to do some crazy stuff, but for me, physical exercise was always
Right.
important. But I quickly realised that I couldn't rely on people to babysit in a way that was any help. So I just got up an hour earlier
Okay.
than the rest of the household, and I did my thing for an hour in front of
Jane Fonda.
Jane Fonda or whatever it was. But whatever your thing is, that, even if you can't get out of the house, that you go off and find a corner, or, you feel okay
Hmm.
about allowing your child or children to do whatever it is you try and limit them doing.
Screen time, and I don't
Um,
limit it now.
yeah, screen time or
But yeah.
whatever, exactly. And you know that can be your time for you, even if it's in the corner of the kitchen while you're doing the dinner or whatever,
Hmm.
that you create. I got very good at creating space around myself without really changing anything,
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
just
Yeah.
blotting out the world, as it were. But, sometimes it can just be going for a 5-minute walk, or just walking once around the garden, or, anything that just makes it time for you, or that you stay up even though you're knackered, you stay up an extra half hour to read a book that just takes you out of yourself, or whatever.
Yeah. I tend to edit
Um,
podcasts for 5 hours at a time, so
there you
that's my
go.
me time, which is weird because I'm
Yeah.
basically listening to me. It's it's a really weird experience. Anyway,
I think talking to oneself, no, don't knock it. They've proved that talking to yourself as you do things helps you to work stuff
there you
out.
go.
You're on a winner.
Well, one thing I wanted to touch on, actually, you have a very unique perspective here, not just because of the amount of time that you've been parenting a neurodivergent child, but also you've overseen my family and our journey through neurodivergency from over the road. And I know a lot of people that listen to this podcast that know my family so intimately just from all of the stories. So I'd just be interested to hear what your sort of observations are from seeing us emerge into the street when Jay was 2 and Otto was 2 months old and India was but a pipe dream.
I think, what stood out initially was that Jay was so intelligent and so observant. And then that Otto was such a very different child and so sensitive. And
No
yeah,
shit.
what amazed me was that, okay, I could see you have Jay, and then you have Otto, and then you're going to have another one. Really? Because, I thought, well, okay, go for it. But how you managed two and
No.
then decided to have yet another, I'm like, wow. And I remember
I'm
saying to you
still
both,
not sure.
how do you do this? We're very well organised. So you must be. My God, you must be.
That is true. We are both impeccable at admin, but but yeah, I mean, did you suspect neurodivergency
Yeah, with
when you
with
saw
uh,
them?
with Jay, definitely. The one I
Oh
didn't
right, okay.
spot so much was with India, but then girls mask so much better and
Yeah.
are generally more interactive anyway. So I did think that she might have escaped. Um, but
No, she's really leaning into it at the
yeah,
moment as
so
well. It's
it's,
great.
yeah, I mean, although, yes, quite how that would have been, heaven knows. But I think that you manage it all marvelously well. Obviously, I don't live under your roof with you, and I can't know how it is day to day. And but from where I sit, I think you manage it with a marvel of calmness and sensitivity and humour, which just seems, well, I think it's like this wonderful kind of safety blanket duvet for the kids, that they can feel safe. And especially, I thought Otto's sensitivities and where that led him, how that led him
Hmm.
to feel, gosh, I thought, kind of anger and having the tantrums is one thing, but that sort of soul scrunching, yeah, sadness, wow,
Yeah, soul scrunching
that's
meltdowns.
just
Yeah.
really, really tough.
Well,
But,
thank you. That's a really yeah.
and they're fabulous. I mean, they're gorgeous
They've got
children.
character, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah, in bucket loads. And, how marvellous, really. I think I always sort of felt like you're so clearly neurotypical, really, whereas the rest of the family seems on their
Yeah.
tangents.
Yeah, tangents is that's an
It's
interesting way of putting
interesting.
it. Well, thank you for that, Steph. Just to have that perspective is I would take issue with the calmness comment because it's not always calm. Yeah. In our house, I'm not always calm,
No,
but
you might not be, but there's not any panic. I never pick up panic. So I'm sure you have it, but
oh, yeah,
it
but
doesn't.
it's like a duck paddling underwater, isn't it? You can't, it's portraying panic around my kids is not helpful, so it's all
No, no, no,
internalized.
no. I get that. I learnt that early on too. But with three,
Yeah, absolute madness.
It's not all rubbish.
Okay, so we'll look at the positives now, I think, because there are positives. Because one of the focuses of this particular episode I wanted to take from it was really how far we've come in a relatively short space of time. Because there have always been neurodivergent people.
Oh, for
As
sure.
far ago as Da Vinci, allegedly, like before that, it just,
Probably.
it is prevalent in all humans and possibly has been for all of time. Um,
I think so.
but if you look at how far we've come in the last 30 years, even the last 10 years, it
I
feels
would agree.
like finally things are starting to gain momentum. If you look at the advances in academic research and in science, which means that neurodivergency is much more widely understood than at any point in history. The internet makes it much easier to share this knowledge. Social
Mm,
media means that more and more people are sharing their experiences of neurodivergency, so that other
yeah.
people can kind of pick up on that and identify that in themselves and feel proud, almost, owning their
Mm,
neurodivergency. So the stigma is vanishing, because there's a lot of stigma, I think, there used to
definitely.
be.
Definitely.
Neurodiversity is no longer this sort of secret shame to be brushed under the carpet, or for those kids to be
Mm,
shepherded away. And I think it's a really positive thing what's happened in the last few
God,
years. Like,
yeah.
yes, it's fucking hard raising neurodivergent kids. That will never change. And yes, our education system is under enormous strain because more and more people recognize that they're neurodivergent, so they have to accommodate the needs of those people. And also, the
Mm,
parents
mm,
are not going to be fobbed off. They are fighting the battles. They
yeah.
are doing
Thank
exactly what you
goodness.
did back in the day, of just
Yeah.
like, getting your pointy elbows out and making sure that you're going to fight your way to the front for your kid, right? So obviously there's
Absolutely.
that strain, but something's going to have to change in the education system. In the education
It's
system, and it will. I have every confidence it will. It will take probably quite a long time. But if you look at how far we've come in just 10 years, I can envisage a time where that our kids' needs are much more freely accommodated by an education system that is fit for them. Because as we all know, it's not going to be our kids that are going to change, is it? They're here to stay, and we're here to fight for them. So,
absolutely.
you know,
Definitely.
so I
Mm.
feel positive.
Yeah, you should.
What I also feel positive about listening to your story is that looking after our neurodivergent kids is innate. There's like an
Mm.
instinct, right? It's not just like a maternal or a paternal instinct. It's very
Yeah, I
different,
think
isn't it?
that's right.
There's
Yeah.
an
Mm.
instinct that you get a feel for your kids and you understand them, and you write, as I say, you write their own rule book. But so much of the stuff you were doing is now just stuff that is freely sort of talked about as being the paradigm in parenting, and that's inspirational, and it really feels, I don't know, it fills me with a great sense of pride that we'll find a way. We'll always find a way.
Absolutely. Yeah, don't ever get downhearted about things where there aren't, because there are a lot of answers out there, but there won't always be all the answers for your
Hmm.
children. But don't worry, because you'll work it out. You will work it out for yourselves. You're bright people, and there's always a way of working it out.
Yeah, thank you.
Neurodiversity champions.
Okay, we'll get on to neurodiversity champions now. So this is any people or organizations that are fantastic in terms of championing neurodiversity. So obviously the people and organizations championing neurodiversity back in the 90s and 2000s are probably not around anymore. Is there anything
Probably
anyone that
non-existing.
you want to champion?
Things that I know that still exist, as it were, that certainly helped Charlie as he was coming out of that relatively protected space that is kind of childhood,
Hmm.
was the Supported Employment Office,
Right, okay.
which is based in Brighton and
Hmm.
Hove. They may have other things in other parts of the country. I have no idea, but it's they they bridged that gap for trying to introduce him into some sort of work related activity.
Right, okay.
And for him, it was introducing him into voluntary
Hmm.
work. And it was fantastic. They stumped up and saw him through where other organisations were offering absolutely nothing, and were able to put me in touch with other agencies and other opportunities. So they were brilliant.
Amazing.
And then I think, a lot of the organisations that can rely on volunteers can sometimes offer quite supportive environments for volunteers too. So Fair Share was really good. The Food Partnership, Oxfam are three that particularly stand out for me. I appreciate that this is my perspective,
Oh yeah, but
and
that's
a
what
lot
this
of
is
this
all
was a
about.
long time
So
ago.
what did
But yeah,
Oxfam do, for example?
that all of their shops, that they welcomed people with some learning difficulties, people with mental health problems. Autism wasn't too known about, but they accepted that people with difference and different ways of behaving and different needs, and accommodated them so they'd very quickly work out what the strengths were and then play to
Right.
those,
Okay. So did
and
Charlie
then
work in
protect them
Oxfam
from
then?
roles. Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh, great.
And in Fair Share as well. The Food Partnership did a lot with him. So that was a lot about kind of more independent living skills,
Yeah.
with learning to manage food and knives and scary stuff like that.
Wowzers.
Yeah, wasn't it just? So yeah, those are three that I would particularly, three or four that I would sort of put forward.
Great. Thank you for that.
Tiny epic wins.
Okay, tiny epic wins now. These are the situations where in neurotypical families wouldn't find anything particularly remarkable about, but in our neurodivergent, neuroshambolic families, they are epic wins, and I like to celebrate them. So, have you got any tiny epic wins that you want to celebrate?
Oh, thousands now. I've collected a little neighbour. Obviously, massive epic wins
Yeah, they
like
are huge.
learning to drive
Yeah,
a
that is
car,
enormous.
passing a test, passing any test.
Was
Wow,
that his first
that normal
test that he
people do.
passed?
Yes, ever,
Amazing.
ever, ever.
You must have been
Fantastic.
terrified watching him go off. Like everything was crossed.
Well, it was very interesting because a friend of mine has a son who is neurodiverse but very
Mhm.
intelligent, who said to me, "Well, Stephanie, Charlie will have to learn with a driver, with the driving instructor, and he'll have to be thought fit enough to put through a theory test, and he'll have to pass the theory test, and then he'll have to be thought fit enough to be put through a driving test, and he will have to pass with an examiner. And if he can do all that, then what are you worrying
It's
about?"
true. Yeah, they're
And
not
I'm
just going to
like,
give it him like
do you know
as a
what? You're right.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, okay, that was an epic one. Yeah, I think going into the world of work, that felt
yeah. Of
massive,
course. Yeah, these are two
where
huge wins. Yeah,
but there were loads of other maybe equally important ones, like actually noticing that the tap's leaking or that the light isn't working.
yeah,
Well, if they're going to live independently,
yeah. Of course. Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
absolutely crucial, because that wouldn't have got noticed. Are things like actually managing some level of personal hygiene.
hmm It's like a 31-year career of tiny epic wins. It's pretty impressive. We had a tiny epic win this weekend, actually.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I mean, we went out as a family for like a few hours. Yeah, I know it was because we
Wow.
haven't for ages. Like Jay has not wanted to leave the house, and he certainly doesn't want to be around us, and he doesn't really like going outside. And I'm not sure quite how Tam managed to talk him into it. I just know that when I got in the car, he went, "I am here against my will." Right, but even then, he was still on board
But
with.
he was
He was
there.
still there, right? He obviously moaned and protested, but we got there. So we went to Leonard's Lee, which is this kind of gardens.
I know.
We are definitely the most disruptive there. There's no question. There was like a Halloween trail, and we were, probably the scariest thing on it.
Love it.
But everyone was on good form. Jay really loved
Wow.
it. Otto and India were really on board with it as well, and we did the
Oh,
whole thing. And we were only going to be there,
so
like, I
happy
was
for
going to
you.
think like maybe an hour. We could do it for maybe an hour because we haven't done anything all as a family for a long time. And we were there for like 2.5 hours. Jay wanted to stay for a little bit.
Wow.
He was like, let's go play hide and seek in the rock garden. Now, that
Oh,
makes me nervous because losing sight of all of my neurodivergent children in public is not top of my list of priorities. But
no,
we did it and they all loved it. And then we were like, right, should we go? And Jay was like, can we do it again? It was just, I don't know what happened. The stars
just
aligned.
clicked.
Don't know what happened. He was well on board with it, and I was just like, "Yeah, I'll play this as long as you want, dude." It was so lovely. So I thought I'd just
I'm
celebrate
delighted
that.
for you.
We all basically went home, and then everyone went in their own separate directions. But but for that
That's
moment,
okay.
exactly right. So, but it was a really lovely afternoon.
Oh, it's fantastic. Well done.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Another win.
Yeah, totally.
What the flip?
Okay, we'll do the what the flip moments now, which are these are moments that our neurodivergent children will say or do something that completely confounds you and makes you just go, what? I get these regularly. I don't know if you've got any, Stephanie.
It was my birthday, I think. So he went and my sister used to take him and he would choose a
Hmm.
card. And so he chose this card. And when I opened it, it was a big card with a picture of a
Hmm.
baby. And the baby sort of had a smile on his face. And it said, Mummy looks kind of stressed out today. And then you opened it and it said, what can I do to push her over the edge? I thought it was
He
hysterical.
chose that himself.
I thought, yes, spot on.
Nice. So you are self-aware.
Maybe more self-aware than I
Yeah,
know. It was
nice,
hysterical, so funny.
nice.
Oh, what humour.
So I've got two what the flip moments this week. Both from Jay. He's the gift that keeps giving. One was when we went to Leonard's Lee, and there's this massive doll's house, and it's huge inside its own building. And one of them in there was like a toy shop, a doll's house toy shop, and Tam took them all in there and said, "Okay, if you could pick anything in this doll's house to buy, what would it be?" And Jay, without thinking, just went, "The corpses of the innocent," from nowhere. And Tam was not keen to indulge it, so Tam just went, "That's not for sale." And he went, "Okay, the Black Doll's pram." Either or, not fussed.
Oh, it's wonderful, wonderful,
I don't know
wonderful.
where he got that one from. The other one from Jay is him criticizing me, as he likes to do, where he went, "Normally, when God forgets to give someone beauty, he makes up for it in brains. He didn't do either for you." Or then he went, "All of your good traits went to me." It's like, whoa. I had to sit down. It was like a multi-pronged attack. I had to think about just how deeply I'd just been wounded. Oh, man.
Yeah, you have to have a tough skin in
Oh,
this
yeah,
business.
exactly. Okay, that is it for this week's episode of Neuro Shambles. Firstly, Stephanie, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience and your stories. And you are genuinely an inspiration. It's wonderful to hear how you got through some pretty rocky times back in the 90s. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you so much for
Oh,
inviting
you're
me. I
more than
feel
welcome.
the pleasure's been all mine and I feel very privileged.
I also want to say a huge thank you to the audience. Thank you so much, guys, for continuing to listen and for giving us your lovely feedback. If you want to make that official, if you want to write any reviews on the podcast platforms, on Apple Podcasts in particular, that would be wonderful. It's always good to get some reviews to convince other people that this isn't just rubbish. That'd be nice. We're also on the socials if you want to follow us there. We're now on TikTok as well. When I say we, I always say we, by the way, as if there's some big conglomeration behind Neuroshambles. It's me. It's all me, no one else. So I am on TikTok now, and that is that's a very different world out there. So yeah, follow me over on TikTok, and I'll put some more nonsense on there. That's it for now. That's all I'm going to witter on about. So once again, thank you. And all that remains for me to say is have a nice life.